Every day we coexist with evil. We witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is something inherent in our society. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Lucas, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The Yeremi Vargas case. Yeremi Vargas was born on July 18, 1999, on the island of Gran Canaria. He was a friendly blonde boy who grew up with a passion for motorcycles, karate, and playing games with his cousins. He was the first child of Juan Francisco Vargas, commonly known as Juanfra, and Ithesa Suarez, who had known each other since they were children and started a family at a very young age. Ithesa lived just a few houses away from Juanfra's family in the 80 housing neighborhood in Los Llanos on the island of Gran Canaria, amidst undeveloped land and wind turbines. Even though they were very young and their relationship was unstable, Ithesa gave birth to their second child, Aiden, in 2006. However, it seems that Aiden's arrival only highlighted the cracks in their relationship. Juanfra, then 22 years old, had been fond of partying and women since he was 15, and he also spent hours in the gym. Of course, these were not priorities for Ithesa, especially after having two children to look after. Due to all their differences, a few months after Aiden's birth, Ithesa left Juanfra. Following the separation, Juanfra moved back to his mother's house, Maria del Carmen, where he lived for a short period of time. He then began a sort of nomadic life, without a stable partner or a fixed place to live, staying in one place one day and another place the next. He also lived temporarily in the houses of his new partners, resulting in him fathering 7 children, with 6 different women throughout his life. A few months after the separation, Juanfra was working outside of the neighborhood. On Saturday, March 10, 2007, following tradition, Yeremi's maternal family gathered together. It was almost 2 in the afternoon, and while the grandparents, uncles, and Yeremi's mother were in the living room, he and his cousins were playing in the street. From the window, the adults could see the vacant lot located a few meters away, where the children were playing with a cardboard box from a TV bought days before. Yeremi was enjoying himself, using his plastic shovel to fill a small bucket with soil. The table was already set, and the grandmother called them from the window to come eat. All the children went up except for Yeremi. When his cousins entered the house, they went back to the vacant lot to hurry him up. But the 7-year-old was no longer there. Alarm bells rang, and they asked the neighbors, but no one had seen anything or anyone. Yeremi's mother couldn't imagine that her son could have just disappeared like that. The family immediately reported the incident and expressed their concern because Yeremi had respiratory problems and was on daily medication. This condition was communicated to the civil guard, which responded promptly to the disappearance. It was unusual for him to be nowhere to be found. The next day, the civil guard and the police deployed a large search operation, which was later joined by the army, as well as neighbors and volunteers. The streets started to be plastered with posters of Yeremi's face. His shy nature led authorities to rule out the possibility that he had voluntarily gone off with a stranger. Only 5 days had passed on March 15, 2007, when Jose Segura, the government delegate in the Canary Islands at the time, revealed that the initial investigations were focusing on immediate family, friends, neighbors, and school. He added that they had a rational hope of finding the boy because controls had been activated at ports and airports, and he had not left the island. The next day, the search operation extended to the coast, where divers also participated, looking for any clue that might lead them to Yeremi, but it was in vain. When a week had passed since the disappearance, More than 1,000 people joined the largest search operation ever conducted on the island to find a person. The year before, a girl named Sarah Morales had disappeared, and the population felt that history was repeating itself. Another minor had been taken from the arms of his parents. For the first month and a half, Yeremi's house remained open. Family members and neighbors slept in the garage, on sofas, mattresses, and the floor. The first posters, in black and white, included the family's phone number. Thousands of calls came in from the island, the mainland, and from abroad, including Mexico, China, and London. Many calls expressed sorrow or support, while others were malicious. Someone tried to extort 50 euros from the family in exchange for information, telling them to run because the boy was dying in a refrigerator. This was too much for the family, making them realize the cruelty that can emerge in such moments. On March 19, 2007, Yeremi's family's hope was rekindled. However, it was concluded that the subject did it with the intention of profit, and they had no connection with the case. He was released 2 days later. In June of that year, then Minister of the Interior provided an update on the actions related to the case. He reported that they had received 600 calls regarding Yeremi's abduction, all of which had been investigated, and some leads were being followed up on. However, to the family's despair, the case seemed to be growing cold. In January 2008, the arrest of a 37-year-old man for the attempted kidnapping of a 9-year-old girl in the Gran Canaria set off all the alarms. In relation to this person, a chilling detail emerged that caused a lot of pain to Ithesa. The individual owned an animal crematorium, and there were rumors that if he was the one who kidnapped Yeremi, he could have easily disposed of his body. However, the authorities conducted examinations in the incinerator, and nothing was found. On the first anniversary of the disappearance, the family received support from their municipality, and that same year, the investigation was reinforced with 6 new agents from the Central Operational Unit. In January 2009, the mothers of Yeremi and another missing child, Sarah Morales, distributed 4,000 posters in Gran Canaria with photos of their children, hoping to prevent them from being forgotten. In 2010, investigators discovered a skull in a playground in the same locality where Yeremi disappeared. Initially, it was thought to be him, but after various analyses, it was confirmed to belong to a woman who had died 10 years earlier. On the 5th anniversary of the disappearance in 2012, the Civil Guard wanted to let the community know that they were still searching for the little boy. A new call for public collaboration was made to clarify a lead they received, which reported that a white car, driven by a man wearing a cap, was the key piece of the investigation. The community joined forces, and in less than 24 hours, the Civil Guard received more than 90 calls and emails with new leads. They thanked the public and stated that they were not ruling out any hypothesis, including family revenge, human trafficking, organ trafficking, and even pedophilia. They reported that 195 people accused of pedophilia were investigated, including prisoners. They also scrutinized men under 65 related to crimes against children and extended investigations to other people on the island. But it seems that the effort was in vain because nothing was found about the boy. Fernando Torres, a karate teacher who was involved in the biggest pedophilia case in Spain in 2010, was also under the authorities' scrutiny. He had given classes a few months prior to Yeremi's disappearance. He was sentenced to 302 years in prison for committing 35 sexual abuse crimes and 13 other crimes of corruption of minors. His residence was thoroughly searched, but no evidence was found linking him to Yeremi's disappearance. Almost coinciding with the 6th anniversary of the tragedy, Yeremi's family offered a generous reward to anyone who could help locate him. In 2013, the Civil Guard announced that they were investigating 3 Scottish pedophiles, 2 of whom were already imprisoned in their country. It was thought that they might have some connection to the boy's disappearance, since all 3 were in Gran Canaria when the events occurred. Investigation sources reported that several agents had traveled to Scotland to take statements from the suspects, but the men remained silent, resulting in another dead end. In 2014, the Minister of the Interior announced that there were quite promising new lines of investigation in relation to this case. However, no results were seen. In 2015, the discovery of a skull in the municipality revived hope of at least having closure, but this possibility was again frustrated when it was verified that the skull did not belong to Yeremi. In May 2016, the case attracted attention again, but not due to new leads. Instead, it was because of cross-accusations between Yeremi's stepfather and two young people from Murcia and their parents. Jonathan accused the four of spreading harmful comments about the missing child on social networks, while the Murcia family accused him of threatening them. On June 1, 2016, the Civil Guard found evidence to investigate Antonio Ojeda, better known as El Rubio, a 56-year-old man and former resident of the neighborhood. The subject in question had been in prison since 2015 for abusing a boy he approached while playing in the street. The events occurred in 2012. Antonio confessed to a cellmate that a neighbor had ended Yeremi's life and burned his body. According to his story, they had drugged him with a solvent on the day of his disappearance to prevent him from raising. Given that Yeremi suffered from pulmonary insufficiency, it is likely that the blue color Antonio referred to was related to cyanosis, which causes this skin coloration during episodes of stress, such as the one the boy was presumably subjected to by his kidnappers. The detail of the child's respiratory problem was only known to the authorities and the family. How could Antonio know that the boy would turn blue? Because of this, he was at the center of the Civil Guard's investigation into Yeremi's disappearance. Antonio refused to testify or provide DNA samples. However, the court, which had been handling the case since the day the young boy disappeared, decided in 2017 to provisionally dismiss the case, concluding that there was no evidence against Antonio or any other person. This decision was confirmed by the Provincial Court of Las Palmas a year later, leading to the closure of the proceedings against the pedophile, who was released in March 2020 after serving a sentence for sexually assaulting another child in 2012. Yeremi's family, who have never stopped fighting to keep the investigation open and prevent the case from being forgotten, requested the reopening of the case. They argued that the presiding judge had not given due weight to evidence that the family considered very important. All this evidence pointed to the only suspect at the time, Antonio. In their request to reopen the case, the family mentioned that the judge had also dismissed another piece of evidence provided by the testimony of Pedro, who was 11 years old at the time of the events. He stated that he had seen a white Renault at the scene of the disappearance. In 2015, during a conversation with the prosecution's lawyers, Pedro, who was approaching 20 years old, clarified that it was indeed a white Renault, the same model owned by Antonio, but that he had initially confused the vehicle due to similarities in the rear design. The family also requested that multiple statements placing Antonio as a regular and daily customer of a bar located near the place of Yeremi's disappearance be taken into account. In fact, it was possible to see the vacant lot from the bar's entrance. In 2021, on the 14th anniversary of Yeremi's disappearance, the family's hopes were focused on the potential reopening of the case after all their efforts to achieve it. However, the moment was overshadowed when, on August 30, 2021, in the early morning hours, Yeremi's father, Juanfra, was arrested by the National Police on suspicion of sexually assaulting his own 13-year-old daughter, born from a relationship that began after Yeremi's birth and disappearance. Juanfra was brought before a judge on the morning of August 31, 2021, resulting in his provisional release with a restraining order while the investigation continued. On September 2, 2021, the court ordered the reopening of the case regarding Yeremi's disappearance. For the family, this was a significant step forward, as it allowed them to continue their fight to determine responsibility and see the perpetrator brought to justice. However, just 2 days after his provisional release, on September 2, 2021, Juanfra once again devastated the family of his first son. He was accused of sexually assaulting another teenager, as reported by reputable Spanish media outlets. The victim was the daughter of one of Juanfra's ex-partners, and like the first alleged victim, she was also 13 years old. Police sources confirmed that she was encouraged to report the incident after the alleged assault on Juanfra's daughter became known. On September 3, 2021, the court granted Juanfra, 37, provisional release with precautionary measures while the accusations against him were investigated. However, sources from the Superior Court of Justice of the Canary Islands explained that his release conditions could change during the investigation. Juanfra refused to testify in both cases and was prohibited from approaching or communicating with the complainant. He was also banned from leaving the island, had his passport confiscated, and was required to appear before the court every Monday. Determining what kind of person Juanfra is important for this case because his behavior could have influenced his son's fate. While under investigation for the two alleged cases of sexual abuse against his daughter and his stepdaughter, Juanfra made headlines again just a year later. Yeremi's father was arrested in 2022 after his partner reported him for alleged domestic violence. The woman had previously reported him for abuse earlier that year, and although he was summoned to trial in February, the woman withdrew the complaint before the trial, resulting in the case being closed. She later told the civil guard that she had withdrawn the charges under coercion from Juanfra. She returned to him, but far from stopping his violent behavior, the abuse continued for 6 months, leading her to file a new complaint. Juanfra, who, as mentioned earlier, fathered 7 children with 6 women, had been under suspicion for 15 years. On the day of Yeremi's disappearance, he had a solid alibi, as he was seen in the other side of the city, and even the civil guard had intercepted him at a traffic stop. However, there was always speculation that the boy's abduction could be related to a revenge or debt incurred by Juanfra related to drug trafficking. Yeremi Vargas's father, who comes from a humble family and has worked in the hospitality sector since a young age, has not provided financial support for any of his children and has not taken on the responsibilities that are his to bear. A neighbor from the area who has known him since childhood told the media that Juanfra has always been very successful with women, but he fathers a child, gets bored, and leaves them. She described him as a man incapable of commitment. However, this absent father who was on a very wrong path could have been the cause of Yeremi's disappearance, but there is nothing to prove it. What is certain is that the investigation into the disappearance of the 7-year-old boy remains open, and the reality is that news about his case is currently linked to scandals involving his parents, not to police updates on new findings or lines of investigation. In early 2023, the boy's mother, who continues to fight in search of answers, gave an interview. The interview went viral as the woman pointed out that to the pain of losing a child was added the suffering caused by having to deal with all kinds of attacks on social networks disguised as dark humor, which caused her a lot of harm. In the interview, she also reported receiving calls for a long time with all kinds of insults or pretending to be the civil guard with false leads about Yeremi's whereabouts. With the case reopened, a new opportunity is drawn to find Yeremi and try to figure out who kidnapped the boy. His mother has stated that she trusts the justice system and has begged the perpetrator to give Yeremi Vargas' remains back to the family. She indicated that if the boy was no longer alive, which would be very likely, she begged the kidnapper to give them the remains so they could give him a proper burial. And well, that's the case for today. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me to continue creating content. This was another chapter of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.